This is episode 29 of the Shame Proof Your Life podcast, the one where I talk about grief. I'm your host and life coach, Danita Bremer. Have you ever received a prompting that you ignored for a long time, like 17 years? This podcast is that for me. I'm telling my stories, I'm learning from my past, and my hope is that you will hear something that gives you hope, reassurance, or understanding. All right, today I want to talk about the worst grieving year of my life. And I know it feels like I'm kind of jinxing myself by saying that, but that's how I feel. That's how I characterize it. That's my story about this year. So the year was 2000. I was a sophomore in college. It was actually between my freshman and sophomore years. And so I was young. I was working as much as I could during the summer. I was living with my boyfriend, not really seeing my family much. And up until this point, so I was 20 years old because this was August of the year 2000. And up until this point, I had never had anyone that I was even remotely close to die. And so one day, my boyfriend and I, who turned into my husband, we were out. I don't know if we were working or if we where exactly we were, but we came home and it was late. It was like 10 o'clock or maybe a little after 10 o'clock because I remember walking in the door and first of all, the answering machine was flashing. So we checked the messages and I had a message from my friend Jesse, who I went to school with in high school and who also attended the University of Washington with me. And he said, "Hey, Danita, call me as soon as you get this message. We need to talk." And it was very odd because we didn't really call each other very often. We didn't really hang out. Like we had this sort of shared past. We lived in the same dorm our freshman year of college, but other than that, we weren't like super close. And so I thought it was really weird that Jesse was calling me, but it was pretty late. So I thought I will call him tomorrow. And then we start to get ready for bed and we turn the news on. And a few seconds after turning the news on, there was a story about a young woman who had been working at, I believe, Yellowstone for the summer. She was a college student and a horrific accident had happened. She was walking back to her lodging. I don't know where they stay. And she fell into a hot spring. So, Yellowstone is known for its hot springs, and sometimes the ground can kind of cave in and have a hot spring underneath it. So it was dark, it was at night, and she was with a group of friends and she fell into this hot spring. A couple of her friends fell in as well, and they all sustained really bad burns. But this young woman received the worst burns, and she was air flighted to Spokane to a hospital. And this young woman was my friend who I went to school with from sixth grade. And in sixth and seventh and eighth grade, we were best friends. And in high school, we had grown apart a little bit. But it was still small school, small town. We were still good friends. And so I'm listening to this horrific news story and just like in shock. Like my jaw was on the floor and I just started crying and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is why Jesse called." And I'm pretty sure after that I called him even though it was late and he said, "Well, a group of us are driving back to the town where I grew up in. Would you like to come with us?" And I just couldn't. I couldn't go. I couldn't fathom that like my best one of my best friends in the world had died basically. Um, I think at this point she went into the hospital and then she died a little bit after that. I don't really know the details, like a day or so later. And they ended up having a funeral for her, and they had to hold it in the high school gym. That's how many people were touched by her short life. And she was just, oh my gosh, one of the most amazing people you will ever meet. Kind of the saying, only the good die young. That was my friend Sarah. She was so full of life and vibrant and happy and so accepting and loving and smart. And she was just one of the best people I have ever met. She and her family were like a second family to me. Her parents were like second parents to me, especially during a time in my life when things were pretty dark. Um, I think she only slept over at my house once, maybe twice, but I was at her house as much as I could, as often as I could go there. And they were just a beautiful family, so kind and generous and loving. And this is something that I don't know if I would call it shame, but it's something I still feel bad about to this day that I didn't go to her funeral. And now I look back and I have a lot of compassion for myself because I had never lost anyone and it was such a shock to me. Like I had a really hard time wrapping my mind around the fact that she was gone and oh, so sad. Like it still makes me just want to cry thinking about her and how young she left this earth. And I have compassion for myself now because I can look back and see that that was the way that I was grieving, that I needed to kind of grieve on my own and come to some kind of feeling about it, but I couldn't face going home and seeing her family and ugh, I mean, really, it still breaks my heart to think about it. And I wish I had gone because I wish I could look them in the face and give them hugs and tell them how sorry that I was, but my 20-year-old self couldn't handle doing that. I couldn't face those intense emotions. And knowing now what I know about myself, I do know that for a really long time, I coped, probably mostly my whole life, I coped by kind of separating myself from my emotions. So when this happened, I couldn't move toward it in any way, shape, or form. And that's how I had to grieve and that's how I had to cope with it. So that was a really big shock and a really big hurt to find that out and to just oh, such a beautiful soul that, made the world an amazing, beautiful place. And I will always be grateful for her friendship, for the things that she taught me. She taught me how to shave. Um I'm just going to like just remember her for a couple of minutes here. I remember when we were still in elementary school in 6th grade, her mom had told her that she should chew every bite 10 times, and so she was adamant about chewing every bite 10 times, so we were always the last ones in the lunchroom, and we were always laughing, and one time milk came out of her nose, and she had this long, beautiful curly hair, and she was just like a flower child and free and happy and like one with the earth and just, yeah, always just happy, always bringing people around her up, always looking on the bright side, always super positive and kind, just like so, so kind. Um, and so I will never forget her or her family. So grateful that they were in my life. Um, I miss you, Sarah. Little did I know that a month after Sarah left us, my mom had her accident. And this time, I wasn't able to run away from it or avoid it. I had to face it. And talk about numb and shock. So I've done a podcast episode about when my mom died, and there's still lots more to talk about there, but I kind of got through that. So that was in September of 2000, and it took me about 3 weeks to deal with my mom's death and her funeral and her accounts and her affairs, just like all of her things. And then I had to return home to school. School started the end of September. And a few weeks after that, about 6 weeks after my mom passed away, I got a call from my grandmother saying that my grandfather had had a massive heart attack and passed away. So, as you can see, this year was pretty horrific for me. Now, my grandfather was old and his health had been failing for a long time. He was nearly blind, nearly deaf. He was in this like brace thing because his back was so terrible, and he was just miserable. And this is my dad's parents who I grew up around and have lots and lots of fond memories. These are my grandparents who offered me a safe place and kind of this consistent, steady presence. And they were also the grandparents that kind of judged me when I started dating when I was young. But I loved them so much, so, so much. Like I miss them incredibly. But this instance of grief and loss was kind of coupled with joy because my grandfather was in such poor health that we were kind of praying for him to go quickly, and it was quite a burden on my grandmother who also wasn't young and had her own health issues. So when my grandmother called and said your grandfather had a massive heart attack and he's gone, it was actually a relief and it was a joy. Sad, yes, because loss almost always comes with a certain amount of sadness. But the lesson I learned this year when I lost 3 people who I loved so close together was that grief happens in so many different ways. There isn't one way to grieve, and every person grieves differently. There is no timeline, and there's not a right or wrong way to do it. I will say, though, that I wish I had gone to Sarah's funeral and faced some of those emotions. It just felt a little unresolved, I guess. And I do for a long time I felt a little guilty, a little bit of shame that I wasn't there for her family in that time when they had been there for me for so many times. So there was a little part of me that felt guilty about that. But also, like I said, I was young and I had never lost anyone. I didn't know how to deal with it, and I couldn't face my emotions. I was kind of forced to face my emotions with my mom when she passed away. I was the one that had to take care of all of her affairs, and there was definitely a kind of numbness there. And then when my grandfather passed away, it was sad, and I did come home again and go to his funeral. Um, but it was more of like a celebration of a life well lived, because he did live his life well and he had so many amazing experiences and touched many people. And so for him, like it was the gamut of emotions with these 3 deaths in my life. With losing my mom, it would take me at least a year before I could think about her or talk about her without crying. And with Sarah, my friend, I think it didn't it was kind of muddled because her death happened first, and then my mom, which like totally knocked me over. And so I don't know what would it have been if I hadn't had these other experiences with loss. But I would think that it would probably take me about a year with Sarah as well to just really grieve that friendship and all of that. So I just no one ever told me like how you should grieve or how you shouldn't grieve, which I know is something that some people have to deal with when they experience loss in their lives. But that was such a beautiful blessing for me because I didn't have any kind of framework or expectation of what grief was or how long it would take or what it would look like or when I should be done or anything like that. And so I was really able to just grieve in my own way. And later, throughout the years, I've heard lots of people um, share their experiences with grief and loss and how either someone else or even themselves, they put on an expectation or a timeline about how it should be or how it shouldn't be. And I'm so grateful that I didn't have that. I just had to put one foot in front of the other every single day. And of course, there were moments of joy in there. About a year after this terrible season in my life, I got married. So, fall could have been a time when I always kind of feel sad. And sometimes that happens still to this day, but it also is sprinkled with some joy because we got married on September 1st. So it was kind of like right in the middle of this timeline. And so I just made it my own thing. And I will say that sometimes, even though it's been 20, almost 21 years, the grief still sneaks up on me. I still have moments, usually moments when I'm alone, and I don't know, where I'll be thinking about something and it'll trigger a memory from my mom or from my friend Sarah or not so much my grandpa, like that was a joyful grief. But then this wave of grief will just wash over me and I will cry and I will feel angry sometimes. And like that's just how it is. I don't think that that's ever going to go away. When we lose someone we love, we will always have memories of them and we will always have a little tinge of sadness and missing them and what could have been. So, for anyone out there who maybe is in the throes of grief right now or who is telling themselves that they shouldn't be sad anymore, they should be through it, I'm just here to say that I don't know that we ever get through it fully. It does lessen over time. The sharpness of it softens, but I think that the amount we grieve is in direct proportion to the amount we loved. And isn't that a beautiful thing? So there's no one way to grieve and there's no timeline on it. And you get to just do it however you want to, and no one can take that away from you. Okay, that's enough for now, and so are you. Please continue the conversation by rating, reviewing, or sharing the podcast, or go to my website, danitabrubber.com, to sign up for my free guide to a shame-proof life. When you sign up, you'll also get added to my email list, and you can reach out to me there privately if you'd like. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit.